If watching YouTube videos in place of traditional entertainment for the past few years has taught me anything, the mistake of listening to people ramble on about how 10 games fail to live up to personal expectations or 10 games are expectedly good because they bothered to show the game itself rather than a vertical slice of the concept, eventually led me to conclude with this being yet again another improvement for the industry as a whole. In retrospect, all of the various opinions game reviewers have when confronted with the challenge of dictating whether a game is worth playing or not, in addition to the subjectivity of it all, provided me with the realization that video games are best enjoyed with as little exposure as possible, with Star Wars Battlefront 2 being a shining example of just that. This game was a really big deal for me among many, though for different reasons. The massive maps and cutting-edge graphics provided a Star Wars experience that of which I've never seen nor thought would ever live up to the hype, along with it supposedly having drastically more content than its predecessor, which I also played to the point where I couldn't move without a strong nudge. To some extent, people being so quick to harp on how everything was wrong with the game got me into some state of long-term tilt with a hint of acute annoyance upon viewing any content featuring the game, so maybe that's why my tone's been leveled and everything looks like a shooter from 2012. Even if I disagree with arguments in favor or against things like loot boxes, the implementation of a class system, and how there's pairing in the game to some extent, I still feel as if making this video is my personal contribution to giving this game a fair shake for the downpour of enjoyment it provided throughout the years. Now, I understand siding with certain things universally despised by gamers shadows the small reputability I have, but watching people slam this game because it hasn't lived up to the expectations set by the original was more than likely the cause of a forced tilt. Not only because both previous and present me couldn't care less about having certain game modes and hero variety, but also because I feel pressuring EA and DICE to make this game closer to a remaster than a reboot because it shares the franchise name, sacrifices tons of potential innovation regarding how the game looks and could have been played. Before starting the real video, it's beyond the borders of essential that I outline where I stand with the franchise due to context heavily influencing how you're going to consider my opinions. Around late 2016, my friends and I all got a PS4 and Star Wars Battlefront 2015, and because all of us were still riding the hype of The Force Awakens, it became our new favorite game overnight. Sure, it only had 12 base maps, no single player, and was hated because it wasn't this and had this, but that never dampened the experience. Despite all the obvious problems that I found upon returning to the game and finding a match with other people coincidentally desperately clinging to the past, the freedom of the star card system, ease of leveling up, and casual nature of the game kept me coming back for the time being. But after experiencing both ways of progression and the management of star cards, there's no doubt that the first game handled this better, with the second allowing for as much personification as high school core selection. Being able to make your own class and develop a distinct playstyle within the match kept the game from being as repetitive as Rainbow Six upon tens of hundreds of hours of gameplay. If anything, the sudden shift in focus between both systems just confused me as to why people would want to replace potential innovation with classes so badly, other than the obvious and the obvious with stubbornness mixed in. Before proceeding further, I feel the need to stress that I've rewritten this short section 5 or 6 times and need to tell myself out loud to just get to the damn point this time. I firmly believe there's good in every game, and I stand by my opinion that everyone deserves to be heard out with no one truly being wrong when it comes to such a subjective topic like game design. Shockingly, tons of people have similar if not identical opinions online, so seeing Novacanno's critique on Uncharted 4 despite me liking the game was really refreshing and reinforces why I think people shouldn't be instantly shot down for daring to contradict the vast majority. No matter how frustrated you are at a reboot not meeting your expectations, unless your video isn't the most viewed piece of media for that game or alters how people think at a reasonable level, what's your point of sharing it if your goal is to be transformative and not relay the same message? It should go without saying that this take is so unfocused it could literally apply to anything, but what I've shown is but a vertical slice, and at that only containing relevant information, by which I mean a half-assed excuse for you to keep an open mind when considering certain ideas. As if locking specific star cards and weapons to one class wouldn't obliterate any chance for player expression and experimentation, which is arguably the fun part of these types of games and one of the only things to warrant more than 5 hours of playtime barring unlocking the cards to do so. Though the star cards themselves would be restrictive as all hell if they weren't locked to one class, things like making your grenade have a larger blast radius or making your shotgun use slugs instead of buckshot comes across as lazy when the first game allowed you to make a custom class with 2 sniper rifles and a shotgun doubling as another sniper through tech. The point is, classes heavily cut down on the amount of meaningful decisions you can make in the pre-game lobby, excluding the nightmare that manifests itself as 3 star cards per 13 classes and 34 heroes. You could also argue the jump pack in Battlefront 1 coincides with having a heartbeat in terms of importance, but making a kit that doesn't have it forces you to be more careful because you no longer have a brain-dead method of escape while instead gaining another option to put towards your offensive or supportive capabilities. Putting yourself at a clear disadvantage in terms of confidence and comfort is comparable to using the EPG or Kraber in Titanfall 2, because though it might be jarring during your first game, upon mastery you'll have a distinct advantage against players clinging to their Gen 8 car SMG. In an advanced movement shooter, picking a gun that isn't anything but hit scan initially sounds ignorant, but if you have a good understanding of the maps, how movement works, how your gun works, and have a mean forearm or CPU implant, you can quickly close the distance and make leading your shots a lot easier. Classes in Titanfall 2 are a lot more lenient with how they can be customized, and though the game places its focus on your weapons and perks, your Titan is the Star Wars Battlefront 2 class system, regardless of how it doesn't loop at every turn or was seen through by almost everyone. Consider Scorch, who's a Titan that specializes in dealing AoE damage through the only method appropriate, while his mobility falls between my words permitted and progress made towards inhabiting HD 40307G. Like Battlefront 2, Titans have 3 abilities that when used go on a quick cooldown as well as 1 weapon, however their version of star cards change your primary focus when deciding how to optimize their DPS according to your playstyle opposed to slightly buffing a defining feature. For example, you could run Tempered Plating and make Scorch immune to crits and his own fire damage, allowing you to throw down both of your incendiary traps and rush your opponent while blocking incoming damage with your thermal shield, which will then literally melt opponents once in range. I won't deny that star cards have an effect on gameplay, but in the heat of the moment I doubt you'll be able to match the star cards your opponent has based on the way they killed you, and because Epic Games released this game for free as an apology, I can confirm that this ends up being the case. These cards, though supposedly boosting stats and improving your character, doesn't substantially change the fact that your job as a heavy is to make Galactic Assault feel populated. Between Supercharged, Explosive, and Standard Sentry, the time to kill doesn't change much barring the bullet type and how you can now damage blocking heroes, despite changing who you're shooting instead of the playstyle itself not being a considerable enough change by Titanfall 2 standards. If they decided to continue to add to and improve upon the system in my original, you would feel slightly more in control of how you would want to play rather than picking a vague objective and trying to meet the invisible quota produced from a lack of control in a 40-player tug of war with not a soul bothering to so much as glance at the irony that are objectives. Classes lacking versatility is why I stick to Assault. Granted, the things I can do are limited because if they weren't the class system would be redundant anyways, but it's better than only sniping with no secondary to back you up or constantly buffing my team in the hopes that they can accomplish something worthwhile. However, without grinding for months, I can experience all of the classes with max level star cards online, but I'm pretty confident 3 alterations of Infiltration won't shock me enough to reconsider. As for the guns, the rate by which you get them is absurdly slow and the last gun you unlock matches the first one in stats anyways, meaning there's still 4 guns per class, which matches the age demographic, so if consistency was important you'll be happy to know that the game doesn't diverge much. I mean, regardless of how I obviously love this game, even I can't defend how it handles one of its main selling points. More specifically, I'd attribute the lackluster gun gameplay to the universe it's set in. By its nature, having super futuristic weapons would restrict DICE's freedom when it comes to sound design, reload mechanics, and visuals, compound with having to adhere to lore and make everything realistic and feel connected, presents the gunplay as an unsolvable problem that needs to be pieced together rather than designed. Aside from the obvious prioritization of plasma weapons in Star Wars, having guns that have actual ammo and don't just use a copy-pasted cooling system is allegedly possible given the amount of lore, but it's in progression where I believe Battlefront could still learn from Titanfall. Guns are earned in a way that you progress through different tiers of gimmicks, starting out with a basic gun for that category like an assault rifle, SMG, or sniper, and following an increase in level you unlock gimmick guns like an SMG with 2 barrels or an LMG that increases its rate of fire the longer you hold down the trigger. Each gun having a defining trait gives everything purpose, yet deviates from the trope of fulfilling a role because it doesn't restrict your class in any way, excluding engagement range. On a side note, this isn't really a problem due to advanced movement and how map knowledge acts more like a skill to be developed rather than defined understanding, meaning the choice of selecting your weapon alters how you'll be playing rather than adding to a predetermined playstyle. Also, while I'm here, at the time if I would have exposed myself to more content surrounding the game's predecessor prior to purchasing it and saw people disliking it, I probably would have assumed the second game followed suit and subsequently didn't buy it. More or less implying that I wouldn't have got to play one of my favorite multiplayer shooters to date, so maybe what I said at the beginning of this video isn't completely without merit. These are the main way how you unlock guns and kits, with credits being earned alongside them to buy things early and permanently. Guns also have separate progression trees similar to Battlefront 2, however these guns don't require 50 kills to get one of your 3 weapon mods for your 5 guns per class, which all leads me to boldly state that Battlefront 2 still lacks content if it was leaning on being a sandboxy first person but mostly third person shooter. And it took me around 10 minutes to do so when other people could directly tell from the beta. But hey, they could also tell this game was going to be a completely unplayable nightmare that deserves to be erased from our history books because of how it contains the borderline illegal, terror-inducing embodiment of hell and sin known as loot boxes. Before I start, I should probably address the obvious so people can stop tapping their foot in hopes that they can verbally whiff punish me. Yes, loot boxes are a bad thing for games to have, and game corporations monetizing them allows for people to pay their way to first, which shatters balance and forces players to feel the need to whip out their wallets to have a fighting chance for an $80 AAA game that they already bought. I know loot boxes are viewed as pure corporate greed, but in light of how I never really cared, I want to at least find out why my opinion would conflict in the first place apart from deeming it a waste of time, despite it being anything but. I've never had a problem with people paying for better loot because I always treated this game as a relaxant for more thought-intensive games, thus not making getting killed by someone with 3 purple star cards all that concerning. However, it's important to realize I'm only saying this because of how I engaged with the game. For instance, if this was CSGO, I'd lose it, to put it as lightly as I can. The evident benefits to loot boxes, give me a minute, relies on how they distribute star cards randomly, something I'm almost certain at least 2 out of the 3 people watching wouldn't expect me to commend. Let me put it this way, as stated the fun part is experimentation, and given how this game isn't competitive based on its design, map layouts, lack of team coordination, the sizes of the teams themselves, and the randomization that stems from player skill from game to game in absence of a ranking system, further randomizing your hand in this casual of a game takes away the burden of doing well, with the teams being so big you usually have both high and low level players either side, evening out the odds and dampening the tension of winning a match. Supposedly. EA and DICE know this game isn't supposed to be competitive based on the deficiency of game modes alone, so calling the system pay to win, though true, doesn't hold anything beyond how some idiot actually bought microtransactions to win at a casual game. Inversely, if the game did have competitive game modes, complaints would be more than justified, but I've already debunked why this is more or less impossible, saving another 20-minute video, but I'd argue seeing 3 purple star cards does more mental damage than the physical damage they could ever cause ever could. With all of this being said, I want to explicitly state that I'm not defending EA or these practices in general. I've seen the atrocities that managed to crawl out of the forbidden hard drive that's the root cause for the various sinister undertones in this video. The main idea with random loot is that you can't sidestep the main attraction just to sweat your ass off and get 120 eliminations. Congratulations, I guarantee not even you care for reasons I'll be discussing in a minute. If it was well integrated, it would still need way more content to speed up progression, and even then would probably still come with some strings attached, but nevertheless this system would have further leaned the game towards its intended audience had it not been completely replaced. Perceived greed or more so poor decisions aside, recently the loot boxes were replaced with the individual leveling system, which in my opinion is the worst of the bunch because now you're severely punished for venturing outside of your comfort zone, along with progression astonishingly managing to take even longer than community service tenfold. Leveling all 47 units separately takes an astronomical amount of time, and if you don't grind out each one in their specific game mode, you'll more than likely be tilted upon joining to find everyone with max level star cards, creating the illusion that their ships are more powerful than your ships despite matured game sense being the driving force behind their performance. This leads you to either chalking the system up to being unfair or realizing that the other player will eventually go through the same thing you will, which is actually an extremely well-crafted metaphor for life that I'm shocked EA managed to convey through gameplay, which thankfully isn't the case because that's pretentious and implies I'd be taking this video seriously with 3 months working on the script alone, obviously disproving that. Moving on from everything, the story is... But, jokes aside, I'm the type of satirical comment that plays games for their multiplayer aspects and intriguing mechanics, while by no means counting out replayability and competitive potential, though I did give the campaign a try and was indifferent about it as usual. Allow me to be as blunt as possible, I don't care about that aspect of the game enough to pour excessive amount of time critiquing why I'd revolted against the game's marketing or treat it with any sense of decency overall, which based on what I've heard is what literally anyone would want me to say and is the only redeeming part to this video. Though something I do care about is the battle point system, which is bottlenecked in tons of areas, but nonetheless is probably one of my favorite innovations of this game due to its originality and rewarding nature based on my experience and limited game knowledge. Look, being able to make everyone feel unique when there's 20 players per team and a requirement for infantry with a pulse is incredibly difficult, maybe impossible, but giving out points based on performance isn't a half bad way about going about it. Previously, the game used power-ups, for lack of a better term, despite me working on the script for months, which garnered criticism for supposedly not meshing well with the setting and shattering your immersion if used. I always thought this was somewhat nitpicky and biased because the universe has religious telekinesis +4 and allows you to cut into gameplay via the partner system anyways, while by no means leaving out how DICE seemingly wanted to provide more of an arcadey, casual tone based on these weird tokens around the map. For those of us not paying attention, the argument is one of artistic preference, and I'll admit there's definitely do's and don'ts in the medium as a whole, but outright claiming the aesthetic of the pickups are bad because they vaguely clash with the photorealism just comes across as sophomania. Especially so when I'd argue the jarring visuals of the power-ups are supposed to make them stand out, and cutting away is an inaccurate description because it's more of a Star Wars style wipe. Puzzlingly, the people complaining about aesthetic and immersion are typically the same people who'd argue getting a message on your screen asking if you'd like to play as Darth Vader doesn't contradict just that, which I find somewhat inconsistent. Not finding vehicle or hero pickups is annoying, but if you were to get them every 5 games they wouldn't feel special or earned, and the battle point system ends up fixing most of these criticisms anyways. For instance, there aren't any jarring cuts away from gameplay because you have to choose to spawn in as the unit, which might I counter, doesn't require you to kill yourself because you're not expected to survive all that long, and if you are, why wouldn't you want to keep your streak going opposed to breaking that flow just to spawn in as some unit? But when you die, all of the battle points you've been collecting will more than likely get you a hero if there's 1 of 2 slots open, which is limited in order to balance the team so they don't get insanely lopsided, which would have been a new complaint had this been absent. But if you bought this game with the intention to exclusively play heroes and vehicles, then why the hell wouldn't you just play those modes instead of complaining about how you can't get a hero when there's 20 other people doing just that? At that point, it's clear you don't want to play as a hero to play as a hero, you just want to beat the hell out of pseudo-defenseless infantry that used to have a pulse. Welcome to the club. Finally, I'd like to touch base with said heroes and how they're somewhat unfocused in terms of 2v2 combat, so maybe you'd be better off not purchasing this game in hopes of engaging in the nail-biting tension and jumping off the screen realistic animation that should never be associated with the hero gameplay in as long as it takes to do this. Heroes in Star Wars Battlefront 2 have a lot of jobs and roles to fulfill. For starters, they need to feel distinct, give the illusion of power, be exclusive, be fun, and most importantly, feel distinct. In any of the basic game modes that I've been using as examples for the video thus far, they usually turn the tide at the objective and greatly support their team, which is why I'm going to focus more on Duel, which is a first to 3 2v2 hero-only mode played on one map without a veto system that locks out the heroes you win with and doesn't allow swapping once the round starts. In spite of its primitive appearance, complexity stems from how you balance your team, given how heroes are generally split between lightsaber and blaster categories, which differ in movement speed, force ability usage, health range, and smoke grenade utilization. You'd think that since this is a Star Wars game, more thought and time would be put into the lightsaber heroes to make them feel more satisfying and all the other things, but from my experience, blaster heroes are much more fun to play as, which could probably be attributed to how you can't master them with a kitchen mixer and a few rubber bands. Though clutches exceed the realm of possibility by the hours upload time itself, having a team with one of each hero type forces you to try and quickly eliminate at least one of the enemy players early on into the match so the blaster hero can pressure the remaining one into elimination, both character and hardware. Your choices concerning who to play always change based on who you're playing against, like running 2 lightsaber heroes if you're down 2 points or trying to make the other team quit by playing any of these and layer on Scarif. Blaster heroes are a massive risk, but the reward of feeling like you did something worthwhile, like clutching against a Kylo Ren as Lando Calrissian, even has the other team excited, but let's just cut to the things that can't be summed up through visuals and a Staxi too. The problem with the hero combat swears by how rudimentary its underlying systems and mechanics actually are, given how majority of lightsaber fights come down to who dodges the most if you actually block, how tanky your character is, and if you used to play cringe cookie clicker during English. Though lightsaber fights are somewhat forced into having a low skill floor and ceiling to keep casual players from getting frustrated at the fact that my swings were not hitting the other player, and how this was originally designed for Galactic Assault. But if they did have a higher skill floor, players constantly dying with them would free up slots quicker but ultimately make them more rewarding and could even make Duel into its own competitive game mode if you still want to believe. Think of it like this game's version of the EPG, however this has to be actual difficulty through complex mechanics and not through decreasing stats or making the controls even worse, notwithstanding how players would likely play as them on the account of identity. While writing this, I've actually ended up realizing that things like your punches not hitting the other player make the game even more demotivating when you know for a fact that there aren't any underlying systems or reasons to give you a definite answer as to why you lost past damn, if only I had hit him faster, harder, or first. Compare this system to a game like Tekken 7, which I didn't just purchase because of a killer sale and trying to further listen to the barn animals inside of my phone. Ever since I played Street Fighter V when it got released for free on PS Plus, I've increasingly continued to research fighting games to find some explanation regarding how to counter grabs, or he keeps hitting me first, or if I do this, why everyone leaves, blocks me, and tries to rematch me in person. Further down the line, when I started playing Tekken, inspecting its systems made me realize how much thought goes into these types of games to make them replayable long term rather than something you can just pick up and play. To illustrate this, frame advantage is a stat that changes based on whether your punches are blocked or not, which ends up altering how fast your next move's startup frames, or the amount of frames before the attack deals damage, will be. The basic example is if two Heihachis both use their 2-2, which is the button input, also known as the demon backhand spin, at the exact same time, they would both hit each other. But if Heihachi B had it blocked, his next move startup would be 13 frames slower from the standard 10, allowing me to punish that with a 1-2-2 1+2 due to its startup frames being quicker. From my experience and understanding, finding a counter to a seemingly unbeatable move that 3-stocked you is the fun part to fighting games, apart from beating the hell out of people, as well as where some of the skill is derived. Once you've found that counter, your opponent is forced to do the same if they want to win matches, with the research stopping once you've gotten to the point where you don't recite the Scrub Lord's prayer upon loss. Counters don't even have to rely on the hundreds of moves found within Tekken, because a simple backdash followed by using my stand and baiting the opponent into thinking I whipped an attack could be more than enough to make someone stop spamming down back 2 for a second, dare to try something riskier. Literally everyone who's ever tried fighting games out for themselves ever is very familiar with the term spam, usually from accusation, which always signals to older players that you're new to the scene or haven't actually taken the time to look into why you're getting Star Wars Battlefront 2'd. Before I start, I should probably mention that I'm definitely not immune to the symptoms, which could probably be credited to Stardust Crusaders giving me the impression that I'm entitled to win this fight, only to realize that I'm not the protagonist or Japanese to begin with. Spam, albeit annoying, can always be countered through utilizing frame data, punishing the player for whiffing, also known as whiff punish, not putting yourself in a bad position to begin with through foot user knowing when to block, and stop being so damn stubborn. If anything, spam is a test of if you actually understand your moveset and have good enough game sense to the degree where you can punish and manipulate your opponent into playing into your hands, given how it always follows a pattern. No matter what the counter ends up being, if a strategy is working, even in the form of pressing one button, then your opponent has no reason whatsoever to stop, and says more about your skill and adaptability anyhow, especially when your constant complaining makes me reconsider whether this is actually worth losing snap score over. So that's why if I'm using my shield stance that blocks all 3 directions of attack, it isn't a good idea to use a heavy for the 3rd time in a row and complain that I'm somehow the bad player because I exploited the fact that conditioning won me the round. Or maybe it's because parries in this game are a little too easy, but I'm almost positive that Wi-Fi cutting out was the real cause of Ubisoft upper management suddenly taking the place of my opponent. But no, the real problem is that losing to someone who only had to use one move to beat you sends your mental game into a whole new level of tilt that ends up arguing for Sony's decision to record party chat. But come on, if you're using heavies over and over and I'm using lights as a counter, how the hell could that possibly be my fault? Just get better at parrying, whiff punish me, sidestep my attacks, don't rely on heavies, or don't try to combo without confirming you've actually hit the person. Turns out your mental fortitude and perseverance is a big part in what makes the difficulty of fighting games vary for so many people regardless of mechanical skill or playtime. Some give up entirely and claim that the game isn't fun and will absolutely never play it for the 4th time that session, or press on and continuously rematch that of which he or she lost just to beat the player once to prove that it's possible. This is especially prominent in Tekken, because I'll admit getting comboed for half your health because of one whiff punish or footsie mistake can be really hard to stay positive about, doubly so when you remember you're a one-person team and have no one else to blame, but I simply have to commend this genre to warrant the ownership of an Alt and F4 key. But I'd rather have 1 or 5 players on my team than 2 in most cases, generally because 4-hour clutches are also impossible due to stun lock coming from 2 Stegosauruses, and I can't even use facial expressions to outline how little depth Battlefront 2 now has by comparison. The reason these games differ from something like Wingman is because of how tanky the characters are, therefore not being able to be put down by 2 flicks and some Project Infinity magic. Something even more interesting is how parts of the community have made house rules to respect the 1v1, and if you don't, I'm sure someone will be more than happy to remind you. It's obvious that these games have a lot of depth and focus placed on their melee combat, given how they're fighting games and emphasize competitive play for the most part, but after saying that for the 14th time, I should probably explain why that's even important to me to begin with beyond presenting it as ostentatious. To give that term some of its own depth, the reason I tend to gravitate towards Walmart Black Friday is because of the amount of thought and strategy you need to put in beyond just pressing the buttons to land 6 frags for montages. I'm talking about real thought though, which excludes searching through monotonous menus and compiling spreadsheets to see what what build has the optimal stance for a class I've been playing for 7 minutes. Planning and executing a successful strategy makes you feel like you've outsmarted the other team through subversion of expectations, diverse use of mechanics, good teamwork and communication, in addition to detailed and intricate map knowledge tying everything together, which grants a feeling of personal accomplishment unparalleled in other types of casual games or games that are over-reliant on execution. Games that end up challenging my strategic process without sidelining themselves into being turn-based or unengaging, while despite me preferring to work alone, not extirpating the fun with friends aspect, elevates these games above the rest, with a quick on-your-feet change in plans once everything inevitably hits the turbine actually working, providing that feeling. Accomplishing big feats like this as a team feels infinitely better than if you were to accomplish them solo. Yes, I did beat someone with 8 times the Tekken tokens, but because I'm the only one on that team, it doesn't hold nearly as much personal accomplishment. Ironic. Perhaps working with a team and being able to coordinate and strategize effectively is the skill and challenge that comes from team-based games, even if it is much easier to think as one person instead of spread across 5. But when these games are complex by nature, stripping away layers should be viewed exactly like loot boxes to most people, with the ping system in CS being something that didn't spark as much controversy as I expected. I'd say hate, because I know how much the internet only twitches to extremes, but it hasn't really had that much of an impact on my games for me to care all that much, beyond growing wary that this could affect other mechanics. With that being said, allowing players to just ping where enemies' locations or guns are devalues the need for verbal communication, which follows a similar ideology to Titanfall's maps, with poor communication or vague callouts potentially being the deciding factor in a gunfight, or at the very least putting your team at an unnecessary disadvantage. So having the ability to just ping where something is without learning where certain places are makes the game less competitive, and now when you die and don't know a callout because you're using the ping system as a crutch, you're even more useless. If I were to take this a step further, playing with randoms is one of the best ways I can think of playing CS, because you're now introducing yet another layer of skill known as the incredibly complex social aspect. Regardless of the effect it has on my rank, execution is completely separate from understanding. Having good social skills to diffuse team tension through self-deprecation or complementing good plays keeps the team morale high and keeps certain individuals from being prone to tilt, which ends up having them make worse decisions and probably dying, leading to more tilt. In a way, playing with randoms is this game's loot box, with each game bringing uncertainty with who you're going to be dealt and what their skill set is. Maybe someone's an aim god while others know every smoke in the map, and hey, how did he get 10k from dying every round? The point is, once you're in a game, you're not escaping without a suspension, meaning you're forced to work with who you just met, try to pull off some strats, and see if your team can persevere through the challenges of forced cooperation despite not knowing each other. Excessive tangents aside, the last area of depth I can think of that applies to games as a whole, other than how more casual games have more toxic communities, is tech, which are basically unintended mechanics that benefit the player who casts them, like the not as racist as Shammy framed it, Korean backdash, slide hopping, or parrying. Parrying basically involves timing your swings in between your opponents in order to deal damage without needing to lock a Twitter account, which I think is only possible because certain heroes don't get stunned on hit and don't run the risk of getting comboed for whiffing or having attacks blocked. Finally, the thing I've been sidestepping further this entire time, apart from vaguely mentioning it, are hero abilities and how there's no correlation between them for lightsaber heroes. Heroes and character selection are basically a staple of fighting games nowadays, Korea gaming, I think, but that logic certainly holds true when you see the sheer number of characters in almost any fighting game's character select screen. Some button inputs can cross over from character to character or game to game, but in spite of this, characters themselves usually differ enough to feel distinct while still adhering to the baseline requirements or archetypes. In Battlefront 2, this is something I can finally commend, because each character doesn't have a role and for that matter doesn't even have a distinct playstyle, which allows the player to experiment in a variety of ways even if it results in one optimal combo. Regardless of whether it was intended or not, Han Solo surprisingly has a grenade that has to be detonated manually, which means I can throw it at my target to briefly stun them and close the distance with my shoulder charge, which further stuns if not knocks them over, allowing me to use sharpshooter to finish off a massive portion of their health. And because I want to promote just how much better blaster heroes are, Lando, who's widely considered to be one of the weaker heroes in the game aside from Ubisoft Upper Management 2077, can throw his disabler down and stun his target to get tons of easy headshots, while also being able to use that paladin's ability to take another chunk of health. Not forgetting that good use of the circle button allows for my earlier statement to be true. It's a shame lightsaber heroes don't mesh this well aside from the obvious or just being able to get hella environmental kills. I don't know why I feel the urge to keep emphasizing this, but I've been playing this game since launch, keeping up to date with the majority of big content updates, spent 2 weeks making a spreadsheet to lay out what each character offers in theory, and obviously love this game to part way through its mantle. But not even I can find any way lightsaber heroes mesh through cooperation or just in the abilities themselves, beyond a couple outliers, and Big Deal is too complex for my blunder brain to possibly comprehend, so I might as well quit now. You know, maybe the fact that they're called heroes is supposed to allude to how this mode leans harder on being a hero shooter than a fighting game. But truth be told, I haven't really played many good hero shooters or hero-based games, and in my opinion, having lightsaber combat that focuses more on the base combat than abilities would be more engaging long-term anyways. Mostly because pressing one button to do this consistently wouldn't hold nearly as much satisfaction because there's little work being done on your part barring when to cast the ability, thus making the achievement of performing a combo in-game feel earned through dedication and hours of practice and not pure timing of the treacherous action of pressing R1. I'm not asking for Tekken with more weapons or for Honor with even more hits done, but adding combos, footsies through dodging, some methods of winning clutches without being a JoJo's fan, at least one more subclass of hero that I can't find through LinkedIn, along with being punished more for whiffing and having your attacks blocked, and preferably some method of pairing would make the hero combat system not be the cause of various nights being cut short. I'm not going to try and pretend like I didn't berate this game for all of its problems beyond the point of getting it, and then turn around and say I love every part and facet of its design, but I'm more than sure that part of it might come across and probably is just that. For all of its many perceived faults, these two games still hold tons of memories within their level layouts, mechanics, systems, and how they feel to play abroad. I can't emphasize enough how exciting it was to boot this game up before school one day and witness the actually breathtaking graphics and inspired sound design before getting to spawn in as one of the new characters and having to catch the bus. Once I got into Galactic Assault on Theed and began racking up battle points for the first time, I ended up wondering what each unit was like before actually getting to play as them, without tears mind you, which further built hype for when I finally did get to, and looking back that was infinitely more satisfying than chance. The decision to make Luke and Vader rival high school community service in order to unlock off launch was a little stupid, but I honestly couldn't care less, probably knowing that this would later be changed and with over 100 hours in Battlefront 1 not making this all that concerning anyways. I still remember the days where friends would gather around the TV in person and 1v1 each other with jump packs and pulse cannons for fun on single player mode. From my experience, single player doesn't deserve quotations, and though so many people hated the fact that there was no campaign, friends and I would play the same maps and modes indefinitely until Battlefield 1 and Fortnite started to be the talk of the friend group. I'm not kidding when I say survival was a genuinely entertaining mode for us to play, and if we got bored on one map, we'd simply play another, challenging ourselves to use awful guns with worse loadouts, or maybe we'd play Walker Assault together offline and try and land trick shots or see how many kills we could rack up in master mode. The amount of replayability this single player had was most impressive, and we enjoyed every second. The possibilities of what we could do and how we went about doing it were very much so limited, but we were optimistic and shaped the game into something we could enjoy by altering the customization it provided, something other games like COD or even Titanfall couldn't allow us to do due to the reliance on shooting. Look, the point is that I'm aware tons of people dislike these games, with some even going as far as to criticize the innovation of diorama mode being awful despite its atypical approach to handing out text for 400 kills, so I take the amount of time that the devs spent making it to complain. I take no issue whatsoever with people criticizing things. In fact, I believe criticism is extremely important to keep tabs on the quality and status of products or egos, with debate being an extremely fascinating topic and something I strive to improve on. Given how rumors of Battlefront 3 are starting to crop up, I thought getting my thoughts down on Tempe 4 would be a good idea, so if the game ever does release, I'd have some frame of reference as to what everything was like in 2016. Not to mention, if EA takes advice from people who aren't professionals and more than likely have no experience in game design beyond theory again, the resulting game and new community spawn from it because it's Star Wars won't have the slightest bit of sympathy for me that time round. But seeing as this video was supposed to be uploaded on April Fool's, keep in mind that it was all a joke, but it wasn't, so I guess that decision's up to you.